Thank you.
May all of Israel be safe. So Chag Sameach, everyone. I'm here, Wes, with my dear friends and colleagues, Michelle and Dan in the Gann Chapel. And it's such a blessing to be with you tonight and to be in dialogue with you tonight. I want to talk to you about Israel, having just been in Israel. I want to talk to you about Jerusalem, having just been in Jerusalem. Shira and I got back today. And I wanted to share basically four thoughts, four vignettes about Israel today, Israel Hayom. And then Michelle and Dan and I will just, you guys interrupt whenever you have a thought. I would love to hear it. And then when we're done dialoguing, we'd love to turn it over and have a real conversation, one of the silver linings of a Zoom call. The first piece is about the airport, Ben Gurion. What was it like to fly out of Israel during war when literally thousands of missiles, fiery death by the thousands are being launched indiscriminately on innocent civilians? How do you do life, and how does an airport do business, and how do planes run? So the short answer, and if you have family in Israel, you know this, all airlines are canceling their flights but El Al. So Shira and I were scheduled to go out on United, 2 different flights, they both canceled, Delta both canceled, only El Al ran. And when you go to Ben Gurion, all of you who have been there know that Ben Gurion is just full on intensity. It's literally eerie and surreal to have an airport where all the airlines are not running, and the only airline that's running is El Al. It's very surreal, okay? Now, when Shira and I checked in, I noticed that there were 5 or 6 tall, very athletic African Americans waiting along with the Haredim and others to get out of Israel to New York. And they were 6'4", 6'5", 6'6", 6'7", very athletic looking. And I thought, wow, they look like basketball players. I wonder what these 5 African American basketball players are doing leaving at midnight from Ben Gurion when the airport is otherwise closed. And Hashem, in Hashem's mercy, gave me a seat right next to one of them. So I was talking to him, and he's a professional basketball player. He grew up in Florida, played his college ball in North Carolina, and he was playing for Beersheba. So I asked him, how did you like Israel? And he said, well, the food was a challenge. I said, why? He said he loves shrimp and oyster and lobster, and it was very hard to get in Israel. That he eventually got used to. He said when he started, all they served really was salads, and he's not big on salads. He got used to that. What he can't get used to, and why he's leaving, why his friends are leaving, is all the bombs that were falling on Beersheba. And he then said that since the war began, every night in Beersheba, the sirens would go off at 10 o'clock, at 11 o'clock, at 12 o'clock, at 1 o'clock, on the hour, constant bombs, constantly running to a mamad, the safe room. And then he said during the day as well, bombs were going off and sirens were going off. And so he said it was impossible to sleep, and it was impossible to play basketball. And so, can everybody please mute? Please mute. So he said it's impossible to play basketball, and it's impossible to sleep. And he said he liked Israel well enough, and he liked playing for Beersheba, but this he did not sign up for. And he took out his cell phone, and he said, this is just from last night. And just every time the sirens went off and the bombs were going off, he videoed it. And he shows me his cell phone. It's war on a cell phone. And it's just beyond terrifying. That's what those basketball players were doing on that flight. One last point, and this is just truly surreal. We're boarded, we're seated, and then the captain gets on, and he says, this is last night into this morning, this is 12:15 this morning. He says there have been bombs and missiles, and Iron Dome captured it and intercepted it, but the debris has fallen on Ben Gurion. And so please get off the plane so that our security troops can sweep the floor from the debris, because it's not going to be safe for the planes to fly until we know exactly what's going on with the bombs flying. So we all got up to get off the plane, and it's a lot of people. And eventually he said, no, you can go back and be seated. My brother-in-law was flying on another emergency flight to New York at the same time, and he had to actually get off and spend 35 minutes in the mamad, in the safe room, until he could get back on. So that's Israel, trying to get out of Israel. The bombs are real. The terror is real. The fear is real. The sadness is real. The loss is real. That's point one from the airport. Point two, and Dan and Michelle interrupt anytime. I met with Micha Goodman Friday afternoon and had a really nice, and he's so generous, very long conversation with him. And first thing to say, I mean, you know this, but I'll just say it anyway, Israel is post-COVID. So when I saw Micha, so if you're wondering, are you ever going to be able to hug people again? The answer from Israel is absolutely. And I was able to get a really nice, strong, long hug from Micha. And Israelis are hugging again, and they're like, it's like COVID didn't even happen. They're back in the world, and we sat together. And Micha is usually a champion of hope, but he was feeling that this is very bad and very much challenging his hope. Here's what Micha had to say. Here's his take: that Israel was, I'm going to give you all of Micha's language, was an hour away, both metaphorically and an hour away literally, from a dramatic new move that would have been healing and positive. He said Israel was about to do a hybrid government where there would have been left and center and right and 4 Arab seats that would have made up a hybrid governing coalition. And it would have healed Israel from within, because left and right and center that have not been able to work together were actually going to work together. It was going to heal Israel from within. And Yair Lapid, who would have had 17 seats, was actually going to give way, and he's a centrist. Naftali Bennett, who's on the right side, had 7 seats. And Yair Lapid was going to defer to Naftali Bennett that he would be the prime minister of Israel, which was a big risk for Naftali Bennett because he's a righty, and so to be in bed with lefties and to be in bed with centrists was already a risk. And then, so I was going to heal Israel from within. I'm giving you Micha's framing and his vocabulary. But then for the first time in the history of Israel, for the first time in 73 years, 4 Arab members of Knesset were going to be part of the governing coalition, which means that Arab Israelis were going to be determining who the prime minister of Israel is. And that was going to be, it's kind of like Nixon making peace with China. To have a righty like Naftali Bennett in bed with 4 Arabs was epical. But he was going to be able to get the prime ministership, and Israel was going to be able to heal from within, and then begin to heal from without with the Arab Israeli population connecting with the Jewish Israeli population. And it was almost all on the dotted line. And then on Monday, everything fell apart in a dramatic way. And to be so close to this epic kind of New Deal, so to speak, was just very heartbreaking from Micha's point of view. And he said as well that I asked him about, why now and how did this happen now? And what he said is Hamas was becoming very irrelevant because the Abraham Accords meant that moderate Arab countries were making peace with Israel despite the Palestinian situation unresolved. And Hamas very well knew that for the first time in the history of the Jewish state, 4 Arabs were going to be in power. They were going to be kingmakers. Arabs were going to be kingmakers in Israel. They were going to be part of Israel's governing coalition, which meant a radical new move for the relationship between Israeli Arabs and Israel, and all of which meant that Hamas was not relevant, was diminishing in its relevance. And so Hamas prompted this war to become relevant again, and was able to try to position itself as the defender of the Aqsa Mosque. And so it did that to disrupt all this new development of new relationships and strengthened relationships, and to make itself relevant. It prompted this war, and it has succeeded in obtaining its core ambition of being relevant again and disrupting peace. By the way, now, Micha didn't say this, but what I heard when I talked to Micha, because I think most of us, all of us, are concerned about loss of life on both sides, and all of us are concerned about loss of life on Gaza too. And we don't want innocent people to die. Period. Whoever, if they're made by God, if they're human, we decry and lament death and suffering of all people. But I have to say, when I heard Micha's talk on Friday, I had the following associations. We had Oslo and the handshake, and then we had Hamas disrupt that with the explosion of bus number 18 in 1995, and that actually killed, among others, Julie Duker from TNEC and Matt Eisenfeld, who's a rabbinical student, and they were very brilliantly able to disrupt and derail peace in 1995. Then there was then-President Clinton and Yasser Arafat, the famous case where Israel was prepared to offer 96%, including Ehud Barak, then Prime Minister, dividing sovereignty of Jerusalem. That was the official position of the Israeli government, and they said no, and then we got the Intifada. And then, just again, if you're talking to liberal children or grandchildren, and they're decrying Israel, just remember that Israel left Gaza, the Hitnakut, and disrupted the lives of 50,000 Israelis who lived there. And after we got out of Gaza, we got Qassam missiles. So and now Israel's about to make a deal where Arabs are kingmakers, and then we get this war. So it's part of a pattern. That's Micha. Yes, please. Yeah.
What did Micha make of that?
What Micha made of it was, Micha was very sad, and unredeemed sadness, because he actually felt, I want to add one other thing. So I just love Micha, as you all know, and he's got the cutest and also the most poignant presentation. Micha's talked at our shul any number of times about shrinking the conflict, right? And many of you have read his book, Catch 67, and most of you have heard more than once his talk about shrinking the conflict, okay? So here's how he's taken his game up a notch. He meets me in the lobby of the Orient Hotel, and he has a briefcase, and he has a picture of the West Bank, or the Shtachim, West Bank, it's Judah and Samaria, pick your noun, and you see all these little pockets of Palestinian communities that are not contiguous. And he says, we can solve this problem. And then he shows me the next picture, which is lines that link all of these 5 different Palestinian areas, which will materially improve their lives, because it means that they don't have to go through Israeli checkpoints. So the whole checkpoint and humiliation and obstruction is going to be off the table. And Micha swears that Israel's military establishment says that will not endanger a single Jewish soul, and it will dramatically improve the lives of Palestinians. And then he shows me a third picture, which is that these 5 areas that are now contiguous, there's a contiguous road, also have contiguous roads out of the West Bank, or out of Yehuda and Shomron, whatever your terminology is, and they'll be able to go to Jordan, to the airport, and get out of town when they want to, without the humiliation of checkpoints. And here's the thing that made Micha so heartbroken, which is that the official platform of the governing majority that was going to be the hybrid majority, including the Arabs, was shrinking the conflict. That was going to become official Israeli policy. Like the 3 pictures that he has, the 5 little isolated islands of Palestinians, and then the 5 islands connected by roads, and then the 5 islands connected by roads connected to the outside world, shrinking the conflict, not endangering any Jews, making their lives better. That was going to become official policy. Just one other thing. Those of you who remember Micha's lectures on Deuteronomy, remember that the king of Israel is supposed to always be learning Torah. He's seated with the Sefer Torah learning. And Micha has been meeting with Yair Lapid pretty much every week, every other week. And Yair Lapid will give Micha a question like, Arab Israelis, what does Jewish tradition have to say about it? And so he's not the king, but he's very high up, is in dialogue with Micha and interested in Jewish sources, etc. And all of that is now off the table. And what this has done is strengthen a very different kind of, administration. Prime Minister Netanyahu. It's included, and again, this is Micha's language, that Bibi has brought in some of not only the hardest right, but outright racist members to be in official positions. So you have a complete inversion of the kind of government Israel would have had to the kind of government it has and is likely to have as a result of the hardening of positions.
Yeah. I wanted
yes.
to speak to that point. I was thinking about, I defend Israel, and Israel has the right to defend itself. And this war is just absolutely horrifying. And I was thinking about all of these beautiful points that Mich is giving and what Israel is doing. And I'm thinking, and on the other side, what role did Netanyahu have?
Right.
When we're talking about the move at the right time, I mean, that whole incident with the 4 Palestinian families that had to be removed. What if we just said, what if Netanyahu had just said, okay, you know what, let's just leave them be. Right. I know the court said this was a 7-year court trial, everything. On the other hand, what if he just said, let's leave it be. Let's just make this gesture now. And
right.
If we make this gesture now, that, I don't know if that would have mitigated anything.
Right.
But just the idea of continuing to, to be a little bit more reaching out. And the right wing,
right.
I don't know, I had this dream last night that Netanyahu and Hamas were almost like in partnership in terms of the further to the right and the Hamas to the right, Netanyahu to the right, keep moving to the right.
Thomas Friedman wrote a column today about how they need each other. Hamas and Bibi need each other. All I'll say on that, again, this is just Micha. I'm just channeling exactly Micha's words, which is that conspiracy thinking is very strong in Israel. Micha estimates that 30 to 40% of Israelis believe that Bibi is behind this because it so benefits Bibi. Mm-hmm. In other words, he would have been out of power, and now he's very much in power, and his power position is fortified. Mm-hmm. He says, and just talking to Israelis, especially talking to parents whose kids are being called up, many of them think that this is Bibi. And actually, Shira and I went on Wednesday to Haifa to meet with 4 women who are all Israelis who do work with CJP's Boston-Haifa connection. We asked them their take. 4 out of 4, and these are smart and thoughtful people and Israelis, and they work on bridge building. They all believe that Bibi is behind this because it serves his political interests, and he must have been behind it. Micha, by the way, says that's not so. That while Bibi loves power, he would never endanger Jewish life or human life like that for power. He doesn't think he's behind it. He believes Micha's position is Hamas is, provoked this so that they could say powerful. But it is the case that there's 30 to 40% of Israelis, according to Micha, who think that, so their politics, like our politics, is January 6th. There was a 1776, right? There's a whole conspiracy theory there. There's a whole conspiracy theory in Israel. I want to talk about Danny Gordis. So Shira and I met with Danny and his wife Elisheva, and Danny is very connected to the university world. He runs the Shalem Institute in Jerusalem. Danny said, the impact, this is disastrous. It's disastrous for Israel, and it's disastrous for Arab Israelis. And Danny said it is now 1952 in Israel for Arab Israelis. I said, 1952, educate me. What does that mean, Danny? What does it mean that it's 1952 in Israel? And he said that in 1952, the position on Arab Israelis was that they are a fifth column. You can't trust them. They're not real Israelis. They're not real citizens. Keep your distance. They're just kind of a fifth column that has to be monitored. It would be inconceivable in 1952 that Arabs would ever be in the governing coalition. Never. They're a fifth column. They're disloyal. They're not real citizens. And he said from 1952 to 2021, Israel made real progress. And that he believes that a real majority of Jewish Israelis wanted to be in governing partnership with Israeli Arabs, but this has destroyed that. So let me talk about that. What Danny and other Israelis are so concerned about is not just Hamas and the missiles, but the fact that in cities like Lod and Akko, their Israeli Arabs are in open rebellion against Israel. So they're citizens of Israel in open rebellion against Israel. And Danny you've all read this. I mean, you all know this. You've read about Lod, you've read about Akko. He tells, he's reading he said, let me just show you this story from the Hebrew press of a woman who lives in Jaffa. And she is in a ethnic apartment complex, a Jewish Israeli living with Israeli Arabs in Jaffa. And comes the war, and the people that are her neighbors go out of the building and start throwing stones at her windows. And her kids are hysterical, and they call the police. And here's a refrain that you hear about a lot in Israel, is that the police didn't come. The police are overwhelmed. And Micha and Danny both said this, that if you're young and promising and talented, and you want to serve the state, you go to the army, or you go to Shabak, or you go to Israel's intelligence forces. The police just don't get the best people. So the police are broadly not respected in Israel, and they are not respected because they don't get the best talent in Israel. And I heard that from both of them. And so what you hear is stories like her and others. We have family that live in Akko. Ashira's first cousin, Joel Block, his son Avishai and his bride and their newborn live in Lod. And if you live in Lod, you're doing it for idealistic reasons. You want to be a builder. And they said it was a pogrom. It was a pogrom. And when they called the cops, the Israeli cops saying we're being attacked by Arabs, the cops didn't come. And when this woman in Jaffa called, the cops didn't come. And then this woman is saying, now how do I see being in the same building, let alone the same country, with these Arab citizens who are stoning my house and terrifying and traumatizing my children? And what's so devastating is that they had believed that there had been real progress. And this whole experience last week took all that progress from 1952 to 2021, and all the progress is out the roof, and now it's just Jew versus Arab circa 1952.
So can I ask a question about that on both Danny's view of 1952 and Micha's idea that we were almost on the cusp of something that has been shattered? Did either of them express a way that they thought we could come back for this, or do both of them feel like this is an irrevocable turn?
Danny Gordis says no. That it's in fact it's going to get worse than better. So, for example, here's another thing that is apparently a big deal in Israel and Israeli universities. So let's say you're a Jewish student at Tel Aviv University. So you're in your class are Israeli Arabs. What do you do when Israeli Arabs come with Hamas flags and Hamas T-shirts? Now you can imagine, what would you feel like if if your kids and grandkids called you up and said, hey, mom, dad, saba, savta, there are Confederate flags in my school. I mean, that would be absolutely forbidden. Confederate flags would be absolutely forbidden. And this issue of not Confederate flags, but Hamas is, Confederate flags are horrible and terrible in 1,000 ways. But, thank goodness the Confederacy ended in 1865. Obviously, the Civil War never ended, but at least, technically the Civil War was over and the Confederate government is no more, although there's obviously a lot of sympathizers for the Confederacy even today, tragically. But Hamas is like right now firing missiles against Israelis. And Israeli Arabs are coming to Tel Aviv University with Hamas flags. So Danny said that's not going to get better anytime soon. So basically the words that you hear are civil war in Israel. It's civil unrest and deep civil war, deep civil tension. And all this hope. One last thing, and Sigalit Davis, our Israeli speaker, and Varda Farber, our Israeli speaker, will really be able to appreciate this. The 4 Israeli women in Haifa, it is such a elegant point. There's a word in English called shared society. And there's a way to say this in Hebrew, which is chevra meshutefet. And the 4 Israeli women devote their life to shared society. But they said that the Israelis who work on shared society never, ever call it chevra meshutefet. No Israeli would ever talk about chevra meshutefet. It just rings false on Hebrew ears. Nobody says chevra meshutefet, including the people who do the work of shared society. They only use the word shared society because the Hebrew language, well, it technically means that. And these are 4 lefties. These are 4 super lefties. These are 4 liberals who spent their life doing idealistic bridge building work with Arabs. They say you can't actually say chevra meshutefet. It's a toupee. It's a foreign imposition. They use the word shared society. And that was in the good days. And now are not good days. Okay. Let me just give you the last piece of this. And then I'll take comments from you and from our class. I asked both Danny and Micha, is there any hope? Is there any balm in Gilead? So Micha said he's being interviewed a lot this week, and he's always the advocate of hope, and he does not have any hope at the moment. It's just really bad for Israel. Really bad for Israel. And it's so poignant because it's so close, and shrinking the conflict will be, which was going to be government policy, is now just the opposite. And Arabs are going to be in the coalition, it's just the opposite. And that there's a deep pathos to that. Micha actually said he needs Shavuot to think about hope. Like, how do you recast this for hope? Okay. Danny Gordis had a really interesting point of view on this, and I asked him to write it up. I just thought it was so powerful. Danny Gordis said, he used a symphony metaphor. And I don't, I'm not musical, so I don't appreciate symphony, but this is Danny's language and Danny's vocabulary. He said, like in a symphony, you have the violins that play the major notes, and you have oboes that come in with minor harmonizing notes. And it's nice when the oboe minor harmonizing notes, harmonize with the major violin notes, but don't forget the violin notes are the major note, okay? Danny said, the major note about Israel is that Jews have a place to go. And that if you want to ask where's the hope, sounds grim, but it's better than the Holocaust. It's better than 1933. It's better than 1941. It's better than 1939. Jews have a place to go. It would be great if we could have a shared society. It would be great if Israeli Arabs and Israeli Jews could be in partnership and productive dialogue and in a healthy shared society. But that's the oboe. That's the oboe note. We'd love it. And by the way, tell your grandkids we've tried. We tried with Oslo, and we got rebuffed. And we tried with Clinton and Barack, and we got rebuffed. And we tried when we withdrew from Gaza, and we got rebuffed. And we tried by trying to create this coalition with Arabs as kingmakers, and we got rebuffed. So we've tried. We love this oboe note, but don't forget that the violin is that there's a Jewish homeland for Jews in danger. And I will just tell you this. In England, there are now, when Shira and I were in downtown today, and throughout downtown Boston where we were, we saw all this graffiti, Free Palestine, Free Palestine. And England has this graffiti, which is kill the Jews and rape their daughters. Kill the Jews and rape their daughters. That's in England today. And I can only tell you, and guess what language you hear all over the place in Israel? I heard it all week long, French. French Jews are scared to death, and they're moving to Israel in droves. So Danny's point is that the hope is there is a Jewish homeland, and that is not going away. The oboe note may be going away, but the violin note, a sanctuary for Jews, is not going away. That is what passes for hope in Shavuot 2021. So let me just pause here for any thoughts and comments, and then at the very end of the evening, I want to bring in addition to Micha and Daniel, I want to bring in the prophet Habakkuk. I think he has something to say to us too. But Michelle and Dan.
So I'm just hung up. We say over and over and over again, and this weekend in particular, it just jumped out so hard that we say, Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael b'imru amen. Just again and again and again and again through our prayers. May God, who makes peace in the heaven, makes peace for us and for all of God's people, Israel. And here we are locked at a time of war. Did anything that Micha or Danny share help you find a way to, does it undermine your ability to say that prayer, or did it help you to develop some resilience in how much we need that prayer?
I think there is there's an ambiguity about that prayer, and there always has been, which is, do we say Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, or do we say al kol yoshvei tevel, for all citizens of Israel, of the world? Are we just praying for peace for the Jews, or al kol yoshvei tevel, for everybody? And obviously, the real prayer that we would pray is for everybody, right? But we don't actually say it. I don't say that. It's in the prayer book, and I don't say it. Why don't I say the prayer al kol yoshvei tevel when that's really my prayer? And I think my answer to that is, so often we cannot control what the other side does. And this is, I want to just talk about, I'm going to be candid with all of you. Usually I get slammed by the right part of the congregation. I sent out the letter on Veterans Day talking about Kristallnacht. I was really worried about fascism after the election. So I'm usually, and I believe, it's to me obvious that there is systemic racism in our country. It's obvious that you can draw a straight line, to me, from slavery to Jim Crow to mass incarceration to police brutality, and I think that is urgent. So I'm usually slammed by the right, but I am on fire with the moral bankruptcy of the left. I'm on fire with the moral bankruptcy of the left. I think the left, the woke people, the progressive people, are morally bankrupt on Israel. I just want to say that. Because what I think a fair-minded person would say is, it's just terrible that there is this violence happening, and that there is death happening, and there's loss of life happening, and that so many Gazans are dying is a tragedy, and that so many Jews are dying and are being traumatized and terrorized, and that nice black basketball players from North Carolina have to flee Israel at midnight because they're constantly traumatized, right? Literally, a woman who came onto the plane last night was hyperventilating And Shira had an aisle seat, and she said, "Can I please have an aisle seat? I'm hyperventilating." So Shira sat in the middle aisle for the entire flight because this one was hyperventilating. It is terrible that that is happening. And any fair-minded person would say that. It's terrible on both sides. And yet the woke people, the progressive people, are morally bankrupt because they don't see the missiles coming from Gaza on Israel. They don't see it. You know what the world is really comfortable with? The world and the progressive world and the left world, the woke people, they're comfortable with dead Jews. You know what they're not comfortable with? Jews who defend themselves. And when Hamas, this letter from rabbinical students that were signed, how could they sign that letter? Do they not see the missiles from Hamas? And let me ask those rabbinical students, if you're on the call, if you're living in Ashdod, if you're living in Tel Aviv, if you're living in Beersheba, and missiles are coming on your house, they're about to kill you, they're about to kill your kids, they're about to kill your loved ones, indiscriminately, all civilians, by the thousands. What do you want Israel to do? And I want to ask the morally bankrupt left, why do you not care about that? And why do you not see that? I'm done. Questions? Brian Levsky says that there are so many people on the call that if you have a question, please send it in the chat room. And Brian, thank God for Brian Levsky, Brian will read it out, the question. So if you have a question, a thought, or a comment, please share it with Brian.
Please chat it directly to Brian, and he will share it with us.
So, and Brian, if you can...
He's doing it now.
And if you can actually speak it out so I can... At the time you get to be my age, I can't read so good, so if you'll just offer it up, then we can comment.
Okay, I have a question here from, I must be either Joanne or Stanley K. I would like nothing better to blame everything on Hamas, but what about the Jews entering the mosque during Ramadan and cutting wires? How did Hamas know that this game-changing government was about to happen? And it is not just some Israelis who see Bibi's hand behind this for his own self-interest. And each time the Israeli right seems more powerful, there is more opposition to Israel worldwide. Very depressing, scary situation. Any comments?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what she wrote, or Joanne or Stan, whoever it was who wrote that. I think it's, even Shira was on a call with CJP with an Israeli spokesperson, Miri Eisen, who you might remember. Miri Eisen used to be in New England, and Miri Eisen has spoken at Temple Emmanuel on more than one occasion. And Miri Eisen said that it is the case that the police in Israel were perhaps overly heavy-handed, but it is also the case that the Palestinians were stockpiling rocks to throw. And, throwing rocks, especially from on high down below, rocks that are thrown from high down below are lethal. And there's no doubt that there were a lot of them. But it is true that Israel could have perhaps figured out a better way. On the Sheikh Jarrah thing, I'm not an expert on this. It feels to me, from what I've read, and I'm not opining because I don't know enough about it, it feels to me like there's a way in which you could read the law and the facts to say that Israel would be legally justified in expelling these families. That said, that feels colossally tone-deaf to me and colossally stupid to me. That's my sense of it. So yes, it does, of course, take two to tango, but yes, and Israeli police were ham-handed, but there's no doubt that the rocks were stockpiled, and there's no doubt that Hamas saw this as an opportunity to become relevant again as well. Next question, Brian.
Leo Sprecher asked, did either of your scholars see any light had Bibi been held on track and brought to justice, and a new election would have had a chance to express a new will?
Both speakers said that Bibi is superb and seasoned at these kinds of tense national and international confrontations. Both speakers said that if a new election were held tomorrow or the day after Yontif, Bibi would win in a landslide because he's actually super good at running a war. Next question.
Okay. Zvi Shifter asked, I wonder what Micha thought about the pressure Bibi, did on, I can't follow what he's saying here, so let me go to the next one. Robin Friedman said, our high school and college students are being bombarded with anti-Semitic comments in school and on social media. What is your advice to those students and their parents?
This is a very serious problem because the sensibilities of the folks on this Zoom call, given our ages, are very different from our grandchildren. And think about, the only good news is most colleges are over and done, and between COVID and the month of May, they're actually emptied out. But that doesn't actually answer the question. The identification of Black Lives Matter with Palestinian Lives Matter and intersectionality and the slanted news coverage makes it a toxic environment for pro-Israel students. And so I think that, CJP and, the Kraft Family Foundation's organization to combat anti-Semitism and all forms of hatred, I think are all going to go into overdrive now to help. And we just need to be very mindful and intentional to name that this is a problem and to equip our kids. By the way, here's something, Shira and I are not sleeping. And the reason we're not sleeping is this is a bad idea if you want to go to sleep, but it's a really good idea if you want to be educated. The IDF actually has a Twitter account. And it used to be, in previous years, you would hear that Israel is great at fighting wars and horrible at Hasbara, at explanation. That is a dated critique. If you go on the IDF Twitter account, you'll see, they're not long. They're like 2 minutes, 3 minutes a video. We need to bring that story to our kids because that story is so powerful and basically incontrovertible. Again, I say to these so-called rabbinical students who don't see innocent Jewish blood slain, what would you do if it was your family? By the way, it is your family. Would you just do nothing? And you look at these, the IDF posts, and you realize we have no choice, and that's what we need to educate our kids with. Next question.
Rabbi Jeff Faust is referring to an article in the Times of Israel where Jews and Arabs start to push back against violence and rallying nationwide. He was wondering how strong is the pushback among solidarity activities this week with Arabs and Jews?
Look, Jeff, I hope you're right. And one hopes that there still is a streak of idealism, a pleitak tana, a small saving remnant of that kind of hope and idealism. All I can tell you, being in Israel now, is it's very much counter the cultural moment at the moment. What you hear about is in all kinds of communities, the Israeli Arabs are in revolt, and Israeli Jews are wondering, what the heck? How did that happen? But maybe there will be a counter reformation and a move towards renewal. But if so, that move is swimming against the tide at the moment. Next question. So, Brian, if there's not any other questions, I wanted to end with some Torah because it's Shavuot. So here's the deal. Shavuot in America has 2 days, as you know. And on day one, Ma'amad Har Sinai, the revelation of the Torah. God's presence in Exodus 19 is just thick and palpable. You know, there's quaking and fire and smoke. And if you actually read the language of Exodus 19, God's presence is so palpable that you can hear lightning and you can see thunder. Think about that. You can hear lightning and you can see thunder because all of your senses are just like intensely, right? I can see thunder, I can hear lightning, I can feel God with all of my senses. That's day one. Day two, same holiday, day two. This is from Habakkuk. I heard and my bowels quaked, my lips quivered at the sound, rot entered into my bone. I trembled where I stood, yet I wait calmly for the day of distress, for a people to come to attack us. Then Habakkuk ends this way. Though the fig tree does not bud, and no yield is on the vine, though the olive crop has failed, and the fields produce no grain, though sheep have vanished from the fold, and no cattle are in the pen, yet will I rejoice in the Lord, exalt in the God who delivers me. My Lord God is my strength. He makes my feet like the deer's and lets me stride upon the heights for the leader with an instrumental music. So first, just to look at Habakkuk in its own context, he's writing this in the context of a war, a people that is attacking. And there is a deep heaviness and a deep loss and a deep worry. By the way, you know, I was telling Danny Gordis about our nephew's wedding that didn't take place, and actually the would-be groom who had his Sheva Brachot weekend that wasn't a Sheva Brachot because he didn't have a Chatunah, or didn't have a wedding, he's now in Miluim. And Danny said, because he traffics in encountering Israeli young people, 20-somethings, he said he once had in the war in 2014, he was talking to a woman who was engaged. And she said her fiance's on the battlefront. And her mother wanted her to buy her wedding dress. And she said in the 2 weeks before, 3 of her friends, these are women in their 24, 25, 26, 3 of her friends who were engaged, who bought wedding dresses, their fiancés all died in Gaza. And this woman said to Danny, said to her mother, and said to Danny, I'm not buying a wedding dress until the day before the wedding. So there's this sense of loss that is real and palpable. And so for a people to come to attack us, and when that happens, right, the fig tree does not bud, and no yield is on the vine, and the olive crop has failed, and the fields produce no grain, and the sheep have vanished from the fold, and a bride won't buy her dress. A bride won't buy her dress, because why should I buy my dress when my groom is on the front and I might not have a groom? I don't want to buy a dress that I'll never wear. So when my groom comes back, then I'll buy the dress, even if it's the day of the wedding. And that's where Habakkuk is, at the end. And then he says, yet will I rejoice in the Lord. So now putting that in the context of the whole holiday. So day one, God is so palpable and so present, you can see thunder and hear lightning. And on day two, God is so absent that the people are attacked, the sheep have left the pen, and there's no grapes on the vine. And I think we have day one and day two in the same holiday. And I think we have day one and day two in the same beloved Eretz Yisrael. We have day one, we have a strong military. By the way, I should just add, on a day one presence note, I should just add that Israel's military is apparently just getting rave reviews. For example, I don't know how much of you followed this, but this was the big story when we were there, that Israel did this whole fake out that we're gonna attack in Gaza. And when Shira and I were driving back from Haifa to Jerusalem, we saw all these tanks going, and I was so fearful, like tanks, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And the Israeli military was saying, we're going in, which caused Hamas's warriors to go into the tunnels and thinking that when the Israeli soldiers go in, there would be a lot of dead grooms and a lot of bereft brides. And it was a fake out, and when they were there, the Israeli military bombed them into smithereens, which is called war. Sad, but necessary. So there's day one presence. The Israeli military is apparently acquitting itself very admirably. And there's day two. There's loss of life. There's bereft brides on the other side. There's bereft parents on the other side. There's dead children on the other side. There's world opinion on the other side, which is obviously against Israel. There's the fact that our children are asking questions. There's the fact that our children are going to universities that are unremittingly hostile to the Jewish state. Anti-Semitism, kill the Jews and rape their daughters. That's in English in England in 2021. There's a lot of day two stuff. There's a lot of day one stuff. There's a lot of day two stuff. And so what we have to do is what Habakkuk tells us to do, not give up hope. This is very serious time. Very serious time. This is serious as serious can be. But the Israeli spirit is completely resilient. My nephew left his Sheva Brachot and went straight to war. And that's the Israel that I left. So let's all pray for Israel. And Michelle and Dan, if you can close with a prayer for Israel as we all rise.
Ose shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru, imru, amen. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael.
Chag Sameach.
Erev Tov, Chag Sameach.